So we've bitten off a big topic, or at least the class act has bitten off a big topic for us. So let's talk about terms. Our title, Fascism, Are We There Yet? Surely is meant to be provocative. But let's start with what we individually mean when we say fascism versus authoritarianism versus illiberalism. How do each of you define the term? Bill, let's start with you.
I mean, fascism has a particular historical meaning, obviously, going back a century now, more than a century to Italy, and was much analyzed and by many people who taught us at Harvard in the 70s, and its relationship to other forms of authoritarianism and dictatorship and illiberalism. I tended not to use the term here in the US just because it comes out of a particular historical context. My friend Bob Kagan wrote a piece in 2016 saying, let's be realistic, let's be serious about what we're seeing with Trump. It is a kind of fascism. And I remember talking with him and saying, I don't know, maybe just authoritarianism is a safer, broader term. And he reminded me that I think it was Sinclair Lewis, maybe in the 30s, who wrote about this and said, when fascism comes to America, it'll come, of course, with distinctive American characteristics. So as long as we understand that, I just worry sometimes that we're going to start analyzing, 1922 in Italy or 1933 Germany and sort of miss what's distinctive here. And it's a long time later, and there are a lot of things that exist now that didn't exist then, and vice versa. And it's a very different country. But I think it is, to the degree that people use it to convey the gravity of the threat, the seriousness of the threat to liberal democracy, to the freedoms, to the constitutional order that we're used to honoring in the US, if we don't always live up to it, but still, I think they're right to sense that this is a special moment, not just a normal political fight, not just people we disapprove of strongly in terms of public policy, but a real threat to the norms and institutions of liberal democracy. And in that and one that might begin with the election of one individual and a few norms being broken in the federal government, but can spill over into other levels of government and into the society and the culture as a whole. So in that respect, it's authoritarianism, it's illiberalism, it's a deep problem. I'm not sure if fascism is necessarily the best term for it, though.
Right, because sometimes people hear that term and then their ears turn off. So we're trying to give some definition. Chad, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I certainly appreciate all those comments. I think that's a really helpful start. I mean, we could think of fascism again in its really early 20th century roots as a type of governing philosophy based on dictatorial leadership, suppression of opposition, rooted in a type of ultra nationalism. But I think when we talk about fascism, and Bill, you speak to this, I mean, really it's defined by its haziness, right? It's defined by the inability to clearly define it. I think we can point to a number of different features, characteristics, perhaps even tropes surrounding fascism, whether it's kind of this sense of nostalgia for a mythic past, a type of focus on cultural regeneration, and a embracing of type of hyper-militarism, particularly amongst paramilitary groups, delegitimizing of political opposition, a type of hyper-masculinity. So I mean, there's all these different traits to fascism, which I think that we can kind of clearly identify in our current moment. But our challenge is, how do we make sense of that? And how do we think about what we're seeing in the context of the United States, kind of within the context of the United States, right? How do we root what we're seeing now, whether we want to term it fascism or something else, kind of clearly rooted in the long duration of American history, right? I mean, going back before the term fascism even existed, right, in the political lexicon. So I think we need to be clear about how what we're seeing today is really pulling from history in very powerful ways. And we're also experiencing the reckoning with that as well.
Thank you, Chad. Nadine?
Thank you both for those wonderful introductions to the subject. I say introductions because it's a bottomless subject. I personally, when we were doing the planning, asked if we could use the synonym illiberalism, because I find fascism so hyperbolic, as you indicated, Alelia. It kind of turns off people as a valid criticism. And yes, you know, my learned co-panelists are aware of the exact historical antecedents, but I think you know, and have broken down very specific elements. But I think in everyday discourse and political discourse and media discourse, it tends to be used as a very conclusory condemnation for ideas that are disfavored. So to me, illiberalism is a preferable term because it gets to the roots that both Bill and Chad have pointed to, a threat to foundational elements of our liberal democracy. Not only as a political structural matter, but also as a cultural matter. And while I see that the current administration has certainly attacked so many important institutions that are essential to liberal democracy, including the media, including academia, including the whole system of checks and balances. I think it's also important and consistent with the nonpartisan nature of this forum to point out that there are attacks on really important pillars of liberal democracy that are coming from the opposite end of the political spectrum as well. Especially when we talk about cultural attacks on the area that I have been focusing most of my attention on for the last half dozen or so years is freedom of speech and academic freedom and an open inquiry. And to bring this very close to home, Harvard, alma mater for many of us, there recently was the most detailed study that was ever done, a detailed survey of college students. 20,000 college students were surveyed by FIRE, Real Clear Education, and a third organization. And it was just published within the last couple of weeks, which showed that, well, first of all, Harvard came out very poorly in terms of students feeling that they could comfortably express their views, could comfortably challenge professors, could comfortably write a letter to the student newspaper. It was very depressing to me to see how many students felt that they couldn't do that. And what was really dismaying was that overall, of all the students surveyed of all the different colleges and universities, more than 18% felt that it would at least sometimes be justified to use violence against a speaker whose views they opposed. So there are tendencies toward illiberalism that are deeply permeating many sectors of our culture and society, including those where we would hope that liberalism would be most entrenched and durable.